Dengan lebih banyak pengeluar vaksin umum kejayaan vaksin masing-masing, bagaimanakah ia akan pengaruhi dagangan saham syarikat vaksin yang tersenarai dan adakah ini akan membuatkan pelabur beralih daripada kaunter saham teknologi kepada kaunter kesihatan terutama syarikat farmasi, dan bagaimana pula dengan daya tarikan saham pengembaraan yang selama ini terjejas akibat arahan tinggal di rumah. Kita bersama Pengarah Strategi Pelaburan NAGA Group AG, Jameel Ahmad untuk membincangkan perkara ini. Jameel, with so many big pharmas announcing good COVID-19 vaccine results, will investors now move their attention to big pharmas as this week or moving forward? Have investors already done this? Berkshire Hathaway has done so. Will many investors follow suit?
It goes without saying that not many of us have had much good news this year because of the difficulties of this pandemic that has affected all of us, no matter where we are, in a different personal way, whether that's circumstances through health or livelihoods or quality of life or jobs. The depth of the different impacts that we've all faced, it's immeasurable. So this is an example of an industry that has caught positive attention because of the work they are doing to end this sad pandemic for us all. So on that level, yes, investors are certainly paying maybe more attention now because this sector has become very, very prominent. But I wouldn't say that investors were not paying attention to them before. It just happens to be that this is a sector that right now is in extreme demand. I will use this analogy a bit later in our interview, but they are the heroes to this story in terms of putting this pandemic away. And I think this is more of the trend that we're seeing rather than your huge investment capital firms just paying attention towards them now. And there's the other instance that this industry is operating not at full capacity, use that metaphor, but they're operating at an extreme pace right now because of what they're trying to do to put an end to this episode, whereas many other industries, due to no fault of their own, have not been able to operate to any sort of capacity. So that might be a result of the investor appetite towards this kind of sector at this time as well.
Tell us more about these big pharmas. Will they see increased revenues, profit moving forward because of the COVID-19 vaccine? Who are the more prominent players out there that investors will pay more attention to?
So there is actually a number of pharmaceutical firms with scientists, behind them trying to work on vaccines. But the two most well-known ones on an international level anyway, in terms of international brands that we would be aware of, whether we're a listener in Europe or a listener in Asia or a listener wherever in the world, would be Moderna and Pfizer, which are the two leading candidates at this stage to get a vaccine over the line. But there are, at least a good 4 or 5 other reputable firms likewise working very hard on a vaccine. And I wouldn't say that the profits and that side of the business are going to move that much because of the unfortunate pandemic. But of course, these firms and these scientists, they are the heroes of the story. So they're going to be known as the heroes of this, of this dark movie that we've all been on, essentially, if I can use that type of an analogy. And the heroes are always well known. The heroes become popular and they remain big names. So I think even following this pandemic, everybody's going to appreciate the work that these scientists have put in. And the same way that we are learning how to appreciate first responders and health staff. And I would think on that level, perhaps investors will pay more attention towards their business outlooks and more attention towards what they're up to as a company, investor relations. So perhaps we will see more accessibility for demand for their share prices if they're publicly listed, and that type of business interest, which can lead them to new shareholders and investors. But essentially, I remain unconvinced at this stage whether profits or revenues are going to move that severely because of this over the longer term. It just happens to be that, again, these are the heroes of the story in line with many other very, good people who have contributed so much to society and so much to health over this unfortunate episode.
But other healthcare stocks, glove companies, for example, are their days numbered?
Now, what happens to the glove manufacturers, the mask manufacturers, and those kind of products that have become essentials and very much, top of demand of what a household needs during this pandemic? That's going to be a fascinating watch. Essentially, I do think that even following this pandemic, all of us are going to be much more alert regarding hygiene and germs and potential viruses and bacteria and so on. So I don't think that these kind of products will be going away, but we should see a slowdown in what has been an unforeseen, unknown, and astronomically grown number in demand 2020. So maybe in 2021 there would not be as much demand as 2020, but yet still these products will remain popular, and I don't think that masks and everything are going away quite yet.
And Jameel, what about stay-at-home stocks, the tech stocks? What will happen to them?
So there's no denying that however we look at it, the stay-at-home stocks, specifically in the technology sector, and those that are in that technology genre anyway, whether that's, your blue chips, your A-listers like the Apples or the Amazons, or perhaps even, those brands we hadn't heard of before, such as Zoom and so on, that those share prices, if we looked overall at the technology sector, are still very powerful and they still look very much inflated. So I do think we should see a bit more of an investor rotation into different sectors once we get the fine print on how this vaccine is going to work and when it's going to be administered and so on. I do think we would see a little bit more losses for the technology sector and these stocks, though essentially stay at home will remain the way of life for some time to come, perhaps until the end of Q1 next year. Maybe, depending on how things are going, we might be seeing life return to normal by the summer. That would be the end of Q2. So I still think there's a lot of time left of this pandemic. It just happens to be that we're all feeling a little bit more optimistic and more positive than we were just a couple of weeks ago, because we now have some hope that the heroes come in. And by the hero, I mean the vaccine. This is what's given us hope.
And Jameel, will this signal the beginning of a comeback for the travel stocks?
So we have initially seen a rebound in a number of travel stocks with specific reference towards the airlines, such as the parent company of British Airways, EasyJet, the other popular airlines like Ryanair, Air France, Lufthansa, and the list goes on. But we also have to be realistic, as positive as it is that a vaccine is getting very close to approval, it's still going to be a logistically difficult challenge to implement this vaccine and to get it distributed. And yes, we could see, travel stocks remain at discounts. That looks quite appealing, but we have to be realistic that we're headed into December. The vaccine hasn't been approved as of yet. Maybe it will fairly soon. We can all hope for that. But we're still going to be, take 3 months or so at least to get this vaccine around. And maybe we can begin to start to think about travel and holidays and destinations. And that's a maybe by the summertime, so the end of Q2. So I still think we've got that sector has another 6 months at least are not running at anywhere near the capacity it remembers just at the beginning of 2020. So I think that a lot of this optimism around airlines and travel stocks, it still faces some challenges because time will only tell. And at the moment, we still don't have the definite figures on when things can get back to normal.
And Jameel, we talked about volatility before brought forth by the US election. Trump still doesn't appear to want to concede. Will volatility be rampant as we get closer to December?
So essentially the world is unknown over whether the current president of the United States will or when, and essentially all of that uncertainty around conceding the election defeat This is still a big question mark for not just investors. This is a question mark for the world because there's nothing that we've seen in our lifetime with more specific reference to the United States democratic system. So we all have to wait and see. Hopefully, as time prevails, the current sitting president will concede defeat, as that's the way it appears to have gone for the election. And if that were to happen, then this would be seen as more of a breath of fresh air for financial markets, essentially. But we still have more than, well, we actually still have 2 months into the inauguration of the current president-elect, that's Democratic nominee and the winner, Joe Biden. And essentially, that's a lot could happen in those 2 months. Volatility won't necessarily be as busy in November as it was. Sorry, it'd be as busy in December as it was in November. However, we're still in an uncertain world because a lot of the volatility in November was actually around the vaccine progress. So I think really the vaccine and the coronavirus and the pandemic, that's still the tier one risk for investors. But hopefully, again, as we've mentioned before, we're starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. We might not be at the finish line yet. We might not be at the end of this tunnel, but at least we can see some light coming through after what has been a difficult 6 months, well, more than 6 months for many of us.